Thanks for joining, everyone. I see Ashlyn on here. Hi, Ashlyn. Um, we have, yeah, people are really rolling in, and we're really excited about today's webinar. So I'll just let a couple more people roll in, and I'll just try to keep doing some intro, and then we'll get started. As you're coming in, if you want to try to test the chat box and tell us where you're joining from, where in the world you are, that would be awesome. We're going to be using the chat feature throughout the webinar, so you can test it and make sure you can type in there right now. Awesome. Got some folks in Minnesota and Portugal.
Oh, wow. Dublin.
Nice. Awesome, all over the place. Ireland, London. So yeah, that's where we love making these webinars. We were just talking about, we typically try to make them in the morning so people internationally can join. But we are recording this. So for those of you who are watching it later, welcome to. So this is one of our monthly Lifeology webinars that we're now hosting a webinar every month where we talk about various science communication or science art topics. So thank you so much for joining, and you can always watch our webinar page on the Lifeology website to see upcoming webinars. And we usually post them in our Slack workspace as well. I'm Paige Jarrow. I'm our VP of Science Communication here at Lifeomic. And I'm typically on these webinars with other individuals that are often writers of Lifeology courses who are hosting the webinars with us. So today we have Elaine and Anna. Elaine is an employee at Lifeomic as well, one of my colleagues, and Anna is a wonderful artist and has illustrated many Lifeology courses with us. So I'll let them introduce themselves, and then they're going to be doing all of the wonderful talking for this webinar on how to write about science for kids. If you do have any burning questions as we go through, I think they'll kind of stop along the way and do some interactions, but definitely throw questions in the chat if you want to make sure we get to them. And you can also, there is a question, a Q&A tab as well. If you want to post an anonymous question, you can post it in the Q&A and we'll get to it when we can.
All right, so I guess I'll start. We do have introductions in the slideshow, so I'll bring those slides up later. But we're coming from, well, I'm from North Carolina, but as you can tell, this accent is not from North Carolina. I am originally from Newcastle upon Tyne in England. And so this webinar is how to write about science for kids. So kind of let's start. So just to kind of give you a high level view, there's this great quote, "It's not easier at all, it's just different." And along with some kind of quotes, questions in the slide there, just pretty much that reaching a younger audience. It's not easier. Kids are people too. And I have a couple in my house. They are brutally honest. They have opinions on everything. They've got vivid imaginations. They're very egocentric. And it's really all about finding ways of getting down on their level. And we're really hoping that today, some of the tips that we share with you are going to help you do just that. And if you haven't had a chance to kind of look at the course yet, these are just tips that we've pulled from the course. So what we'll do next is we're just going to move on to introducing ourselves. So I will hand over to Anna.
Hey, I'm Anna. So I am a children's book author and illustrator and also a science illustrator. So I've illustrated some courses with Lifeology. And I'm from Edinburgh in Scotland, and I'm based at the moment in Cambridge in England. So I studied an undergrad in illustration and then a master's in children's book illustration. And since then, I've just been writing and illustrating children's books. So although not all my children's books are nonfiction and some of them aren't even science related, and I know this is a talk about writing for science for kids. So many children's books cover big ideas like how to share or how to help friends and that kind of thing. So I feel like I have a background in sharing big ideas for kids.
And I am also not a scientist. In fact, I'm not well, I can write, but I'm not really a writer. So my background's in education. So I have 24 years experience in education. I've taught kindergarten all the way through to 12th grade, and 10 years in England, and 14 years in North Carolina. And a lot of my kind of knowledge is coming from that kind of background. I'm also Lifeology communications manager now. I left teaching in 2020, mid-COVID, kind of to look after my nine-year-old twins, but then I moved on to Lifeomic, and I absolutely love kind of working here. Since I've been working here, I've had my eyes open to kind of like science, health literacy, and best practices in science communication. And I do think there's an overlap between art and science, and we have that here at Lifeology because it's all about comprehending and explaining the world around us. And what I bring to the team, I am kind of a little bit all over there, and you might get that impression of me today as I'm talking. I'm very much kind of like emergent thinker, and I've got lots going on in my head. And I really enjoy working with like Paige and Courtney, for example, because they're definitely more linear in their thinking than I am, and they rein me in and they pull me in a little bit. On the right there, that is some examples of my student work from my last school in North Carolina, and from my Instagram feed there. So handing off to Anna.
So science communication is an amazing tool for getting kids involved in science and in reading. It can do so much. You can share education, you're answering questions, you're teaching kids about the world that they live in. You can start them on new paths, and you can encourage curiosity and creativity, and you're able to make things accessible for things that people might not usually come across. It's really good for encouraging reluctant readers through like just bite-sized pieces of information or something that they want to learn about rather than just what they're told at school. And you can welcome people into the world of science really easily through science communication for kids. So today we're just going to kind of talk about how to make science exciting and accessible and engaging for children. And I'll let Elaine take it away.
So if you're familiar with Lifeology, we really understand the importance of using narratives to help people relate. And science really can be a lot of fun. There's so much great material out there for kids to explore, and they really do have like a genuine interest in exploring the world around them. So for me, writing science and information about science, it goes beyond spitting out facts. It's all about how you're going to frame it and how you're going to utilize the tools around you, how you can make it fun. But at the same time, you kind of need to be savvy enough to edit down your work and not bombard your young reader with too much information. And there's a variety of approaches that you can use, such as like interactive activities, where they can put their learning into practice and kind of quench their thirst. At the same time, you also do need to be accessible and you need to be inclusive. And we're going to touch more on that later. So we're going to check out the next slide using some of Anna's books as examples.
So I just thought at the beginning it would be good to show like right off the bat that there's so many different ways to make science fun. Like there isn't going to be a right answer and there isn't going to be a wrong answer. And later on, we're going to use the analogy that writing for kids about science is like a cake. And if we take the cake analogy, we're not going to give you a recipe for this cake. We're just going to be giving you more ingredients for your cupboard, and you can choose what you want to use. So these are just two examples that I thought kind of covered how different things can be. On one side, we've got Humantown, which is a book about elephants, and it explores topics like conservation, animal protection, the climate crisis, and conflict through like a made-up fiction narrative. So it's not like your typical non-fiction book, but it still touches on topics that are quite big and topics that are important for kids to have conversations about. So the way that it deals with the non-fiction aspect of, I guess this isn't science, but big topics, is it just gives kids a base knowledge through a fun little story that they can then build on later with their friends or with their teachers or with their family or with other books. So it just kind of gives them like a little base knowledge through a narrative structure. Whereas on the other side, there's Ada Lovelace, which is a biography about a mathematician. And so that's more of what you would think is like a standard biography book, where it like goes through the story of Ada Lovelace's life, and it has some little fun aspects like the family tree giving fun facts about everyone she knows, or like, I don't know whether you'll be able to see, but there's a quote from actual Ada Lovelace on the bottom page, which is like in a different font, just to give it a little added interest. So this is just a little example to show how different you can do things in the writing for science world, and so that you go in knowing that whatever we tell you today, you can take away and make it your own.
So we do have a question for you, and it doesn't have to be science specific. What we want you to do is to think back to when you were a child. That was a long time ago for me. And what I want you to do is to think about what types of writing did you find engaging, memorable, and fun? And can you remember why it appealed to you? So just have a think about that. And if you have any kind of favorite books, your favorite book, feel free to share it in chat. We are going to share our favorite books with you very shortly. Some of them, they might just be like typical children's books. They might not be science-based children's books, but there's reasons why we kind of love them. So these are my favorite books. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with this book, The Jolly Postman. I actually bought this book as an adult. I did not buy it as a kid because it was not published when I was a kid. But what I love about it is that it's so interactive and fun, and I'm going to touch on it later in the slides. What this book does, it makes kids feel like grown-ups, and it uses different kind of stories that they may be familiar with already, like The Big Bad Wolf, Red Riding Hood, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and it kind of converges all of those stories together into a narrative. And the other thing that I love about it is that I'm quite a naughty person, really. I like to be cheeky, and I like to do things that I shouldn't be doing, especially when I was a kid. And I always wanted to open my parents' mail when I was little, you know? So the fact that kids, they can reach into this book and kind of pull out letters and things like that, it does feel just like that a little bit naughty. And that's also why I've got George's Marvelous Medicine down there, which many of you may be familiar with. The laughs I got with this book as a kid, like, I just loved it so much. Like, I could imagine, I could really picture and visualize George concocting a medicine and doing live experiments on his grandma. And that is something that I really wanted to be able to do. Like, but it was a fantasy. Like, I knew I was never going to be able to do it. So those are my two favorite books.
And I struggled so hard because I had so many favorite books when I was little. So I decided I'll pick a fiction and a non-fiction. So the non-fiction I picked was Horrible Histories. And I guess you guys have horrible histories in the States. I'm not actually sure. I should have checked that. But I really liked Horrible Histories growing up because it was written in like a really personal way, like it was talking to you, and it was kind of interactive. Like there'd be like little jokes, and there'd be little comic strips and quizzes and that kind of thing all the way through. So it made learning about stuff fun. And I think it was the first time I really saw a non-fiction book that I wanted to read, and also a non-fiction book out of school. So that's why I picked that one. And my favorite book, I think, of all time is The Tiger Who Came to Tea. And although that's not sciencey in any way, it is kind of about problem solving. So that's my link in for why I've chosen that one.
It is. I love that book.
And from the chat, we have someone said they like the Terry Pratchett books.
Oh, they're great.
I don't think I've read any of theirs.
Well, you should, Paige.
You should.
So onto the cake analogy. If you're writing about science for kids, it's important to make it accessible. Like, you want them to want to read it. And the best way to start thinking about how to do that is to gather research, and not necessarily just research about the topic that you've chosen, because chances are you probably know a lot about that topic if you're writing about it, but also research about your target audience. What do they react to? What do they respond well to? What do they like? What do they not like? What do they respond badly to? So you can do that in loads of ways. You can actually talk to kids. You can maybe, if you know a teacher, talk to teachers, talk to parents, because parents are the ones that are usually buying books for kids. You can do research online, or you can also go and look at other books that already are published in the world. But I would say if you're doing this, it's good to look at books just generally in your topic. Don't look at a book that's specifically the same topic that you're going to look at. Otherwise, you're going to be maybe too influenced by it. It's good to go and look at other books in the general area and not exactly the same as what you're looking for. And also choose what category that you're going to work with, depending on what age range you're going to be writing for, who your target audience is. Just have a think about all these things, have a look at examples, and think what works, what doesn't work, and why does it work, and why doesn't it work, and what can you learn from that, and what can you take away from that to put into your own work.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that with working in school, I often used to hang out with the school librarian. They know so much. If you have friends who are librarians or anything like that, pick their brains. They know which books get checked out, which ones don't, that type of thing as well. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and there are so many like mom book bloggers at the moment on Instagram, checking them out and what their kids like.
All right, so now we're going to move on. We've mentioned it before, think big ideas. So let's talk a little bit about that. It's a term used in education a lot. If you're from an education background, you might be familiar with the work of Grant Wiggins. If not, check him out. He has a lot of kind of information out there on big ideas. Pretty much what a big idea is, it's kind of like it's a way of seeing, it's a way of connecting. It helps us kind of make sense of a lot of the confusing experiences and isolated facts, and kids have a lot of confusing experiences, you know. It's going to help kids kind of connect the dots. A great kind of tip is to think like a detective. Think about how you can bring meaning to whatever it is you want to write about. And I would use big ideas a lot in my art teaching, and I can see how they could quite easily translate to science too. So an example of a big idea that I might have used with my students was, what is a refuge? So we would kind of ruminate on that and kind of discuss what a refuge is. Is it physical? Is it a way that you feel? Is it somewhere where you go? And we kind of start big kind of mind map planning on that. So think, what are the big ideas of science? I know that Wiggins sometimes uses the example of the food chain. And in there, he's listed things like living things, non-living things, animal, plant matter, energy exchange, predators, garbage, and all their kind of relationship to nature. So that could be kind of like the catalyst to kind of help you with some kind of overarching theme for whatever it is you want to write about. When you're thinking of big ideas for kids writing, you want to think about your subject matter, but you also want to think about the meat of your writing. So what your main focal point is, what the hook is going to be, the main content and ideas, what kind of new words and concepts you're going to introduce them to, how you're going to keep it simple so you don't overload them with information. And one recommendation that we have is start with maybe a simple, catchy question, something that kids find fun and can relate to. So just as I kind of mentioned, I likened some of the process to when I talk about art. So I'm going to kind of share a little bit of my thinking process with you on a slide coming up. But before we do that, what I want you to do is to just have a go at this activity. So let's think we've got a target audience that ages 7 to 8. And the main idea is how the human body works. How can you open with a catchy question? So something that kind of fits in with that theme. I've already got like a few in my head. So if you want to type in chat, if you have any, that would be great. I'll give you like a minute. I feel like a real teacher now doing
I think if you're struggling, a good way to start thinking about a catchy question is think something that kids are always like, why is this like this? Always like, why is something like something else? And usually they like something kind of gross or weird.
They do. Yes, poop. We have lots of
Yes.
books on poop in my house.
Oh, why do my
Yeah.
teeth fall out? I like that
Oh,
one.
yeah. So this kind of thing, really, I do feel like you can watch like a kid's face light up when they
Yeah.
see this kind of thing, especially if it's kind of a little bit kind of gross as well. So as you're just thinking of those, I'm going to transition to the next slide. And this one might look a little bit odd. So I've got like, think like an artist. So maybe you kind of know what you want to write about. Maybe you're going to choose one of those questions up there, but kind of like, how can you get started? Like, how can you connect the dots and be creative? And I'm kind of like an emergent thinker. I like to ruminate. So I've got kind of 6 slides here. And on the top left one of the first things that I do to get started is I do kind of like stream of consciousness writing. I just sit there with a piece of paper and I write down everything and anything that kind of comes into my head. And then I might kind of do a little bit of artwork. So this is science related because this is my earliest memory. My earliest memory is being held down in an ER room at the age of 3, having my stomach pumped out because and being taken in an ambulance to hospital because somebody drank some medicine out of the bathroom. So it is kind of science related. And then that kind of got me thinking about, why do we remember what we remember? And it got me looking up things like infantile amnesia, which I don't know nothing about. It was kind of like a new concept to me. And I kind of started like brainstorming from there and kind of piecing bits together. And then kind of thinking how I can bring them together to come up with some kind of artwork. And I've got my little sketchbook here because I thought I might like forget as I'm talking, but that's kind of like, that is how I work. So if you're having a bit of a kind of block about getting started, maybe doing something like this can kind of help get you unstuck. It's just an exercise in creative thought. And I would use this method a lot with my students, in particular my AP students, to get them started on their art portfolios. So let's transition to the next slide. So this one is about essential questions, more like educational jargon. So I'll speak a little bit on this. So let's say you've got your brainstorm done. Now what you need to do is you kind of need to kind of look at what you have, think about the main point of your writing. You also need to think about what your readers may already know, and then think about how you might be able to generate excitement with what you want to write about. What's really kind of important, and you've started to do it in the chat, is that you need to kind of get on their level and you need to try and think like a kid, you know, like revert back. It makes it much kind of easier. And any kind of questions that you use, they should be open-ended. They should be there to instill curiosity, allow kids to think and really kind of wonder. If you're doing something with a character, they may have some kind of journey in there that's going to kind of get the kid engaged in the story. And then just like these who, what's, when's, where, why's, and how's can really kind of help you with your writing. Anna, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say if you are starting with a question like this, or even if you don't put the question into your writing, it's a good way to start the process of what you're going to write about. Try and think of a question that isn't too, although you want it to be open-ended, you don't want it to be too open that it's already raising more questions. Like, why are boogers slimy is the example we have here, which is good because kids already know what boogers are and what slimy is, but they don't know why they're slimy. You don't want to say something that's too out there, like what is a specific disease or what's a specific cell name that the kid's like, oh, I've never even heard of that before. So keep it like a simple start to draw them in so they already think they know a bit of information, so it's not overwhelming to begin with.
That's a great point. All right, and then we're going to move on to language and concepts. So when you're doing this, you need to kind of think about what content-specific words relate to your question. If you are introducing anything that's new, a new thing, you don't want to have any more than one idea per sentence. Works well. And like if it's for younger kids, you know their books tend to have only a couple of sentences a page, some even just one sentence. If you're writing for older kids, maybe like one idea a paragraph. You need to somehow explain what those new words mean. So you need to decide how you're going to do that. You're going to do it throughout your content. Are you also going to include a glossary at the end? Are you going to introduce the concept and then the word? Also, like kid-friendly language and resources. You want to empower kids when they're reading, you know. So you can do things like use the Fry word list or the Dutch sight words list if you're and it'll kind of give you kind of grade level words that you can put in there. There's also something that we use at Lifeology, the Hemingway app. What that lets you do is it lets you check the reading level. I wouldn't get caught up too much in reading level though. What you kind of want to do, you want to think about how you might just like kind of explain what these new words mean. Looking at poetry, I find can be really helpful. And when I'm writing a Lifeology course, I like to read my Lifeology course out aloud to myself, just to kind of see how the words sing when you speak to them. You know, that's just like one of the kind of things that I like to do. So I do like kind of looking at poetry, especially if you want to have like any kind of rhymes or anything like that. That could be quite fun in your writing. One thing that you can do as well is rather than just use the terms, think about like senses too. So how does something feel? How does it smell? What might it taste like? Something that you might be able to compare it to, and liken those to things that they already know about. And a great example that I found online when I was kind of putting this up and put this presentation together, I can't remember who it's from, but it was somebody who was writing about high pressure systems. And the writer decided to liken high pressure systems to smashing Jello on a plate. So something like that, immediately the kids have a connection. That's jelly for England, Jello in the United States, but jelly in England. So immediately the kids have like a connection to that concept. You know, they know the smashing slime on a plate. That's fun. They know what that's like, and it's going to kind of help them relate and connect to that concept.
So I wanted to just show you a few examples of different ways that different books that I just had on my shelf dealt with new words. So there isn't, like, as we said before, there isn't a wrong way and there isn't a right way to do this. It will just depend on how you work, what you think works best for your writing or for your topic, and also for the audience that you're aiming for, because something might work for a 5-year-old that might not work for a high school student. So we have 4 different examples here. We've got the top one is Ada Lovelace. So this is one of my books where Ada has invented a machine. It's basically the first computer. So there's loads of machine parts that she's like worked out how to do, and I wanted to show this, but they were words like cog or memory that kids might not have come across yet, because it's aimed for like 5 to 8-year-olds. So I made it like the design of her machine with like little arrows explaining what each part was and what it does, so they can visually see as well as being told what each thing does. And then we've got Madame Sacquet by Lisa Robinson on the other side of the top, and that's got a glossary at the end. So this is a book about a rope dancer who's in France. So there was a lot of French terms in the book, which people might not necessarily know. So they can flip to the back and just have a quick read of what the word is if they haven't come across it before. So that's a nice way of doing it as well. At the bottom, we've got Shackleton's Journey by William Grill, which is about Shackleton's journey. And so at the beginning, he's showing Shackleton's ship and he wants to explain all the different parts of the ship. So the way he's done that is he's done a little description of what the ship part is, and then an illustration of that part of the boat or what it's made of, just so that kids can connect to that in their brain. And then lastly, we've got Gut Garden by Katie Brosnan. And so this is all about microbes in your body. And she's introducing a new microbe in this page. And so she's made a little comic strip on the right-hand side explaining what this microbe does and what his job is and what he does inside your stomach. So 4 very different ways of doing basically the same thing. So when you're sharing new ideas and new words, it's useful also for kids to have some context, kind of like how we had a lot of those had illustrations attached to it. So I guess that's context, but you can also do context through words. For example, here on the left-hand side, we've got a little extract from a course we did at Lifeology about teaching kids about COVID. And we wanted to tell them that washing their hands is good, but just saying that, like, that's going to go out their brain. They're not going to remember why they have to wash their hands. But we attached it to this character called Sam as he went about his day. We said Sam has to wash his hands with soap before and after he plays soccer to protect himself and his friends. And so instantly now they've got something to connect. Why is he washing his hands? When is he washing his hands? And so they'll be able to, if they're going out the house, they might think, oh, Sam washed his hands, I'll also go wash my hands, that kind of thing. You also want to use simple to the point language. We kind of touched on that before, but that doesn't mean it has to be dry. You can still make it fun. And an exercise I like to do when I go on school visits and we talk about writing is I like to sparkle up your writing. So the way that we do this is we take like a super simple sentence like, Ada Lovelace really liked eating cake. That's like factually correct. Well, I'm not sure if it is, but for this context, it's factually correct. And it does the job, but it's kind of boring. Whereas you could, so I give a sentence like that to the kids and then they have to go and sparkle it. And so you could say something like, Ada Lovelace adores munching cake, or Ada Lovelace really loves scoffing up cake. And that says the same thing, but in a more exciting and interesting way. So a good way to make things fun is just by replacing words. Just go to the thesaurus and sparkle it up. And lastly, tone and voice. As I said before, Horrible Histories was like my first and my favorite interaction with nonfiction books, partly because it was so informal and chatty. So I like the way that it felt like I was being personally told about a disgusting fact by a friend, whereas actually I was just reading books. So I like to keep a chatty and light tone when I'm writing, so it feels like I'm talking to the reader to kind of capture that same feeling. Of course, that's just a personal choice, but I think it works really well.
One of our next ingredients is using visuals alongside text, something we both know kind of a lot about. It's really going to help engage your readers. Visual literacy, it's kind of so important, and it's really very important for emerging readers too, who might not necessarily understand everything that's in your text. It's going to just help kind of kids understand that words convey meaning, even if they can't like read them. Kids they can look at visuals and it helps them get background knowledge and clues. The example that Anna showed, you know, with the Ada Lovelace, with that diagram, that's a great way for kind of kids to get that background knowledge and clues with the text and the visuals together. It really kind of helps them ask questions about things. It adds interest and it helps them keep focus as well.
Yeah, and I was seeing that loads of people's favorite books in the chat were comic strips, and I think that's a really great tool, especially if it's a reluctant reader who feels maybe a bit overwhelmed by lots of text. Having lots of pictures can make it feel more accessible and easy for them to digest and less scary.
Yeah, there's a big trend in the comic strip books at the minute as well. Like my twins they're like so into them, and I have one who's like a very high reading level for her age, but she gravitates towards anything that's kind of like comic strip like, or in the format of a diary or something like that, rather than just like a plain old text in the book. The book, when we go to the bookstore, she goes straight past it. And so we've got some examples here of different ways of using text and image together. So we've got an infographic there. I think that's a really kind of very succinct and quick visual way to get information across. And that kind
oh, sorry, you go.
You go on, because I put the infographic in and you put the examples and we talk about those.
I was going to say that the infographic is really good. Like, it's one of the best ones that I've seen in it. And I've popped in Guinea Pigs Go Stargazing by Kate Sheehy there, because I thought that was a really fun way of a mixture of illustrations and diagrams, because it's teaching kids about stargazing. So they have all the zodiac signs there, but she's still mixed in little characters who are the ones that are teaching you. So it's like a little mixture of things going on. And then obviously I know everyone here isn't an illustrator or isn't an artist, so you don't have to do these things themselves. And you can even do something as simple as just adding different fonts or different backgrounds or different little icons. So that's why I've picked the one at the bottom there, which is all about money. And I thought it was just a fun way. I don't know whether you'll be able to see it properly, but I'd recommend go look it up, because the way it's laid out is kind of like it kind of looks like inspirational quote type book, but actually it's telling you loads of information, because it will be like really decorative writing surrounded by loads of nice patterns and nice colors, but while still getting the information across to you. And then last, I just popped in that little comic strip again from Gut Gardening, because I thought that was a really good way of getting across new information.
Cool. So Anna, do
I
you
was
see
just
that
about
picture?
to interject. I mean, you know, I was
Oh.
actually just about to say in the chat what Anna's saying, that like, you know, for a lot of us here, we might want to write a storybook for kids, but like we don't have that illustration background or skills. To just know, like, you don't have to go it alone. Well, either you could probably do it very DIY and it doesn't have to be perfect to engage kids, but there's also plenty of illustrators you can work with to collaborate on it.
Yeah,
No,
definitely. You go.
I was going to say there's a question in chat too that you could probably answer about when you write a pitch for a book. Do you try to include images in that to show how you want to convey the information to the reader? Like, what do you do when you pitch your books to your publisher?
Oh, do you know, that's kind of up to you. You can do it different ways. So I've worked on books where people have had like the writer has had very detailed description of what they want in the picture. Or I've worked on ones as well where there's no information at all, and it's just free reign. So it's really up to you, because at the end of the day, it's a kind of collaborative effort. And when you pitch to a publisher, you can always say some ideas, but like make it clear that you're open to other ideas. Or if you're very set on an idea, they'll also be open to that. But what I will say, not to confuse things too much at this point, but if you are going the traditionally published route with a traditional publisher like Scholastic or Hachette, that kind of thing, you don't actually pick the illustrator, they pick one for you. So just to bear that in mind. But if you're doing it yourself, then you can just go find someone who's happy to do it with you.
Oh, I didn't realize this is children's book publishers, you just pitch the book and then they like pair you with an illustrator.
Yeah, it's kind of strange.
Paige have to write herself a children's book now.
Yeah.
All right, so tip 6, use the powers of storytelling. So like your visuals, they help build that visual literacy, they engage your reader. The powers of storytelling are really going to help with the emotional side, their feelings and their attitudes about things. And if you're bringing characters into whatever you do, and you know we do this at Lifeology, it helps the reader relate. Characters are going to inspire your kids if they relate to them, right? Not just characters, but if relatable characters are going to inspire kids to learn more, they're going to connect kids to their own curiosity. But also when I'm talking about characters, you can also I'm also referring to narrative voice, I guess, because there's as Anna was talking about tone and things like that, the character could actually be the narrative voice in the way that you're speaking to the reader, you know. And once again here, go back to that thinking like a kid. I actually have this book that I love, and I shared it with people in Lifeology before, which looks like this, and it's got different exercises in. And one of the exercises is to think like a kid for the day. It pretty much means that you have to behave like a kid for the day, like get down on their level, have a tantrum, like, I don't know, eat like naughty food, that kind of thing. It's a bit like role playing and acting, really, isn't it? I would personally have a lot of fun doing that, but I don't know if you would. But when you are developing your characters, you do really need to make sure that they are relatable. And we're going to touch on diversity and inclusion later, but you definitely want to subvert any kind of stereotypes. You want to have broad representation. You want to think about, if you're doing anything where it's touching on careers, role models, have those positive role models in there, and really kind of like foster empathy too. depending on what it is that you're writing.
And a lot of the time, building interaction into your text can really help kids engage and understand the topic better. And this can be done in so many different ways. And this is especially good, I think, for kinetic and tactile learners to an extent, but I think good for everybody, because doing something, like physically doing something, can help something stay in your reader's memory. Like I remember we got sent home from school one time and we had to make ice cubes just to see whether the water expanded or got smaller when it froze. And I couldn't tell you what the teacher was or what year it was or what the topic was or what book we read it from, but I remember making the ice cubes. So interaction, I think, is super important. But it can be done in so many ways, as I said. And we'll look at a few in the next slide. But before we do that, I would say one thing to really keep in mind if you are doing interaction is that if you're suggesting to do something outside of the book, like, for example, go make an ice cube, really bear in mind what your reader will have access to, because obviously everyone doesn't have access to the same things. And we will, again, touch on that again later. But let's look at some examples. We have... Again, there's no right and there's no wrong way to do this. Interaction will really depend on what your topic is, what your writing style is, what your target audience is. So have a think about how this could work for you. And it can range from doing activities and experiments, like going away and doing the ice cube thing, or it can be like an interaction physically inside the book, like pop-ups or lift the flaps and there's like something underneath, like this human body one. It's a book for kids where there's different body parts, but then when you open, you're kind of like peeling back a layer and you can see underneath, which is clever, I think. Or like if there's holes in the page, that would be like an interaction inside the physical book. But interaction could also be things like worksheets that you can print off at home or that teachers can print off, like Human Town, my book, has like a teacher pack that they can download and give out to the kids. Or Back to Horrible Histories, again, they have in-text quizzes and activities, and they or like little recipes and stuff inside the text. So as you're reading, you have the interaction there and it's in the book, and then you move on to the next page. Or it can also just be simply like talking to the reader or asking them a rhetorical question, because then you're still interacting with them and they still feel like they're being involved, even if they're not going away and doing something.
So then I had to add in my favorite book here because it's got that interactive element. I wanted to show you what it looked like on the inside. I really do think that this is like a very simple but such an effective way of interacting. So remember when I told you I like naughty? So like, to me, this is fun and it's a little kind of bit cheeky in that they go through the book. I've got it right here and you may be familiar with it, but it's got a lot of kind of, I don't know if you could see, it's got a lot of envelopes and things like that in, and they can pull things out. So there's a mini book inside of a book here. There's a letter from a solicitor. This is my favorite one. And this one, and it's about the big bad wolf. And he's like, "Dear Mr. Wolf, we are writing to you on behalf of our client, Miss Riding Hood, concerning her grandma. Miss Hood tells us that you are presently occupying her grandma's cottage and wearing her grandma's clothes without this lady's permission. Please understand that if this harassment does not cease, we will call in the official woodcutter and, if necessary, all the king's horses and all of the king's men." And it goes on so on. And I just kind of, I love it so much. So I just wanted to include that one on there because I could see how you could kind of do that with like science materials too. It's just a way of doing something.
And my screen is frozen.
We're on engagement.
Engagement. So keeping your reader engaged is kind of like the jam that's holding all these cake layers together, because if your reader doesn't want to read your book, well, then that's a nightmare. And that's not what we want at all. You want your reader to be wanting. And I know we keep saying book actually, but this doesn't have to be a book. We're just saying book. It could be a blog, a website, anything. So we've talked about building interaction to keep kids engaged, but could you add in any fun facts or gross facts or funny things, something that will grab a kid's attention and make them want to go tell their friends about it afterwards, something that they're going to remember afterwards? and want to talk about and want to learn more about. Making something educational into something playful is kind of what we're trying to aim for here. And that doesn't mean it has to be like laugh out loud funny or like overly silly, because you don't want to like lessen it or patronize the kids if that's not the way that your writing style works. It can just be subtle play. Even like the book we looked at earlier with the guinea pigs going stargazing, that wasn't like laugh out loud funny, but it was fun because it had cute characters like interacting with facts. So it's a way to like build play into your text. I think as well, a good way to check your engagement levels, I guess, is to reread your text. Like Elaine was saying, like read it out loud to yourself. And are you actually interested in what you're saying? And would you have wanted to read that as a kid? And do you feel engaged reading it now? You could, if you know any children, ask them to read it, ask what they think about it, or even just another grown-up. And format is another great way to keep people engaged, because as I said, we keep saying book, but this doesn't have to be a book. You can write about science in any way. What format works best for your text and for your topic? Would it be a story or a series of facts or a comic book or a blog or a chapter book or a picture book or an interactive website or even a game? Anything. It could be anything, as long as it suits the topic, it suits the way that you want to work, and it suits the people that you're aiming at. So have a think about that as well.
So we've kind of mentioned humor, but I also want to kind of touch a little bit about empathy too. And this is a true story. This is my daughter, right? So my daughter, when she was in preschool, kindergarten, which is like reception in the UK, she had a fear of using the bathroom, and she would hold her poop until it got too much. She was really scared, and as a parent I felt like absolutely helpless because there was nothing I could do. I felt at the time like there was nothing that I could do to help her. So I ended up buying a lot of books on poop. Some of them were kind of like fun books, like Pooh in the Zoo. It's a really kind of fun book where the zookeeper kind of like does an investigation on all the animals' poos and things like that. And that got kind of her laughing. And then we had like the science of poop and farts, which is a little bit more about like how your body would work. And it kind of it normalized it for her. We read them together. And rather than her thinking about her poop problem, like all of the time, it took her away from the center of the problem. And we ended up like sitting together in the bathroom, and we used to sing together and make like songs up about poop from all of these books that we used to read. And eventually, it worked. Like she relaxed and we got poop down. But these books really kind of helped me as a parent like empathize with her. And I think especially for her, we're just kind of like a helpful resource for her to look at, where she really wasn't the center of the problem. It wasn't about her. It was just about finding like more things out about her body, and that other kids hold the poop, other animals might hold the poop. It's normal to be scared of pooping, that type of thing. So tip 10, Anna.
Tip 10 is be inclusive. And be inclusive is a super important thread in this whole process, because you don't want to make a kid feel isolated or disconnected from your text if they don't see their own experience reflected back at them, or if things in the book are inaccessible to them. And of course, that being said, it would be very difficult to reflect everybody's experience all the time because everybody is different. But just the main thing is try and think about ways that you can try and include everyone or as many people as possible. And this is like a huge subject area, of course. So we have a list of things here, but that's not extensive. There's other things that you can think about being inclusive. But a good first easy step is to not assume anything about your reader and try and use language when talking to them that doesn't leave anyone out. Try and use like open language that doesn't specify a lot of things if you're talking about like their home life or their family, that kind of thing. And I'd say as one example, if we think back to the interaction element, the interactions that I like best in books are ones that are like wholly contained within that book, like the ones which are they don't need any printouts, they don't need any materials, you don't need to go do something, you don't need a parent there or anything like that, just something that's in the book that's like it's talking to you, or it's got a quiz that's in the book, something that if you have the physical book in your hand, then you have the option of the interaction, because then you're including everybody who has the book, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we've got those little slides from the course too. The one about the languages I really like is like, so it says, instead of saying ask your mum or dad, change it to ask a grown-up you know. That's a nice little example there. I've got a little slide here about representation in children's books, so you can kind of see how slanted it is. Another thing that I kind of feel strongly about is that being inclusive should not be an afterthought. It really kind of should be the driving force of whatever it is that you're writing about, and it should happen at the planning stages. It can contain real life experiences. Think back to some of the examples of the work Anna shared. You could be like talking about somebody, historical figure, and that way, you know. Also, like, really be careful about stereotypes, as they are a form of tokenism. And I love the saying, it's, if we want to showcase the world, then we should show the world. So don't do the, oh, I wasn't really being inclusive, so let's add this character in here as an afterthought. Like, same with a Lifeology course. Oh, look, I don't really have any, I'm gonna maybe make this person in the background a minority type of thing. You know, you want it in the planning stages. You want to be very kind of intentional about it and authentic. Also, I would say be wary of doing things like centering a character around the fact that they are a minority and just that identity. It's because there's so much more than that. It's a balancing act, you know. You don't have to ignore the fact that they're a minority, but you have to kind of go beyond that and show people in a positive light. And I think this is where the importance of universal themes come in. And it kind of goes back to the interactive example. So a universal theme in a book, what do we all share? What do we all have in common are like kind of great places to start. And I think thinking like that is really going to help you reach that broad audience that you want to reach. And then if you've read our Lifeology course, at the end there's an activity card, and there is a checklist that uses a lot of the points that we've kind of gone over today. It's poster size. You can download that if you want to use it in your writing. It's got some of Anna's lovely illustrations here from the course, and the course has just been linked in chat there. And Anna, do you want to add anything else to this slide?
No, I think you covered it there. Sorry.
And this is one of the little quotes that we end the course with. Little language difference signals to little ones that all families are real and important and should be honored, and that little difference can make a child feel celebrated instead of othered. So that kind of ties in with our diversity and inclusion. And if any of you want to ask us any questions, the QR codes there to our Instagram feeds and our Twitter accounts are there as well. And I have just one last slide that I added that Paige hasn't seen. I wanted to share what the Algarra twins are reading right now. And I think I put this one in because I think it's just kind of like a great example of contemporary current thinking. Because when I think back to when I was a child, when I was 9 years old, which is the age they are, 8-bit technology existed. The first computers were coming out. I hadn't even touched a computer, right? Now, my kids know all about Twitter. They know about TikTok. They know about all of those kind of things that are happening. They know about memes. And I do, as a teacher towards the end of education, I really did feel like attention spans were getting shorter. I was teaching AP art and design, and even the College Board moved away from paragraphs for student writing to 1 to 2 sentences, like tweets, for students to kind of summarize what their artwork was about, you know, so these bite-sized information. So I just thought this was a really kind of cool book that kind of does that kind of meme type of thinking. And It's very colorful too, grabs your attention.
Yeah.
It's a little bit kitschy looking. I
That's so
personally would
cute.
not pick it, but there you go.
But there's an example of research of what kids like.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. Thank you to Elaine and Anna for this. I mean, it's been wonderful. I've learned so much. But we do have a couple of minutes, hopefully if you're able to stay for the hour for questions. So if you want to ask a question in the chat, please feel free. Otherwise, yeah, definitely feel free to email us or tweet us some questions too. But I'll look at the chat for any questions.
I hope you could understand us. No.
I was trying to think of a question, but y'all have covered so much that
We covered too
I don't
much.
know that there's anything that you haven't covered that I
Yeah.
would be interested in.
I feel like we have covered a lot, and my advice would be, if you're interested in writing kids' books, just kind of get stuck in,
Yeah.
You just do it. And the research bit is I think is one of the best ways to get started. Think about the books that you love, why you love them, why you relate to them, and kind of go from there. And do you have any tips, since you are the book author?
No, I would say that's a very good, that's probably the best tip. Just start doing it, and yeah, think about how you would like to see that information put to you as a kid, and then go from there. Think about what you liked. And I would say, going back to our little course, sorry, that what we talked about today obviously is covered in our little course, but we said it in different ways. So if you feel like there was anything that maybe you were like, oh, I wish I knew a little more about that, it might be in the little course that we have linked in the chat.
Yeah, and there's a lot of links within that course too, to kind of research papers and different resources as well that you might want to check out. But yeah,
Awesome.
thanks for joining us. It's been fun. I've enjoyed it.
You.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining today. And yeah, please join the Lifeology Slack is another good place to ask questions. If you can check that out on our website, just go to community and find us. You can join our Slack workspace. But thank you again. And this will be recorded, so you can always revisit it. We'll post it up on the webinar page, the same page where you registered for this webinar. We'll post the recording, so you can go back and see the slides and information. Sweet. Well, thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Bye, everyone.